It was a morning that started like any other, but it would end in a way no one in that house could have ever imagined. The sun poured through the wide glass windows of the Coleman mansion, lighting up marble floors that sparkled like a mirror. Birds chirped softly in the garden, and the smell of roses drifted through the air. Everything about that house spoke of power, money, and perfection, the kind of life people dream about but rarely touch. But inside those grand white walls, something was about to shatter. Grace Johnson, a kind-hearted black woman in her mid-30s, moved quietly through the mansion's long hallway. She had worked there for 2 years, cleaning, cooking, and, most importantly, caring for the billionaire's daughter, Lily Coleman. Grace loved the little girl like her own. Every morning she would braid Lily's hair, pack her school bag, and sneak her an extra cookie before breakfast. Lily adored her. She called her Auntie Grace. That morning Grace was humming a gospel tune as she dusted the staircase, when suddenly a sharp, piercing scream echoed through the house. "Ah! Daddy!" Grace froze. The sound came from Lily's room upstairs. Her heart jumped. Without thinking, she ran, her slippers slapping the marble as she climbed the steps 2 at a time. When she burst into Lily's room, she saw the little girl sitting on the floor, clutching her face and crying. Her toys were scattered everywhere. Grace dropped to her knees. "Baby, what happened?" she asked, trying to gently lift Lily's chin. But just then, heavy footsteps pounded up the hallway. "Lily, what's going on?" It was Richard Coleman, the billionaire himself. Tall, powerful, dressed in a tailored black suit even at home. He stopped at the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene. His daughter in tears, his maid crouched beside her, her hands trembling. "What did you do to her?" he shouted. Grace looked up, horrified. "Sir, no, I didn't. She fell, I think." But Richard didn't want to hear it. He stormed forward, grabbing Lily and pulling her into his arms. "Show me your face," he said. A faint red mark glowed on her left cheek. "Daddy," Lily whimpered. Did she hit you?" Richard interrupted, his tone harsh, eyes blazing. Lily opened her mouth, but before she could speak, he turned to Grace. "How dare you? I trusted you with my child." Grace's hands shook as she pleaded, "Mr. Coleman, please." "I didn't touch her. She fell, I swear, sir." But his anger was already boiling over. "Don't lie to me. You think I don't see the mark. You people, always pretending to be kind until you show your true colors." Grace's heart broke at his words. She had heard that tone before. Not just anger, but prejudice. Still, she kept her voice calm, trembling as she said, "Sir, please. I would never hurt Lily. She's like my own child." Richard turned away, clutching his daughter. "Get out of this room before I throw you out myself." Grace stood frozen. She wanted to explain, to tell him she loved that little girl, to beg him to believe her. But one look at his face told her nothing she said would matter. Tears filled her eyes as she stepped back slowly. Just then, Lily whispered something softly into her father's shoulder. But Richard didn't hear. His anger drowned out everything. "Pack your things," he barked. "You're done here," Grace gasped. "Sir, please," I said now. His voice echoed through the hallway like thunder. Grace backed away, tears streaming down her cheeks. She turned once more to Lily, hoping the little girl would say something. Anything. But Lily just stared, her small hands gripping her father's shirt. Her eyes were full of confusion and fear, and then silence. Grace walked out of the room slowly, her vision blurry with tears. The grand house that had once felt warm now felt cold and hollow. She reached her small servant's room, sat on the edge of her bed and buried her face in her hands. Downstairs, Richard made a phone call. His voice was cold. "Yes, officer. I want to report an assault on my daughter." Grace didn't know it yet, but that phone call was about to destroy everything she had built. Her job, her reputation, and her peace. As police sirens echoed in the distance, Lily stood by the window, clutching her teddy bear, whispering, "I'm sorry, Auntie Grace," but no one could hear her. And in that single heartbreaking moment, the life of an innocent woman began to fall apart, all because of a lie, a misunderstanding, and a world that judged before listening. It was, truly, the morning that changed everything. The morning had turned into chaos. Blue and red lights flashed outside the grand Coleman mansion, painting the white walls in trembling colors of fear. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, shocked to see police cars outside the home of one of the most powerful men in the city, billionaire Richard Coleman. Inside, Grace stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her hands trembling as two officers questioned her. "Ma'am, we got a call reporting child abuse," one officer said calmly, notebook in hand. Grace's eyes widened. "No, sir. Please, that's not true. I would never hurt her. I love that child." But before she could say more, Richard stormed into the room holding his daughter tightly. His expensive shoes clicked against the marble floor, echoing with authority. "There's your proof," he said, pointing at Lily's face. "Look at her cheek." "This woman hit her." Grace turned toward Lily, desperate. "Sweetheart, tell them the truth. Tell them I didn't do anything." But Lily just looked down, tears rolling silently. Her tiny hands clutched her teddy bear tighter. She wanted to speak, but fear held her voice hostage. Richard's face hardened. "You see, she can't even speak. She's terrified of you." Grace shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, sir, she's scared because she knows I didn't." "Enough," Richard snapped. "Officer, take her away. I want her out of my house now." The officers exchanged uncertain looks. "Sir, we'll need to take her for questioning." Grace felt her heart stop. Questioning? For what? She was innocent. But she saw the way they looked at her. The disbelief, the suspicion. She was a maid, a black woman standing against a billionaire. In their eyes, her words carried no weight. "Please," Grace whispered, her voice trembling. "Let me explain." Lily fell from the bed. She hit the side table. "I tried to help her." Richard cut in sharply. "Stop lying. Do you think I'd call the police if I wasn't sure?" His words struck like a knife. Grace's tears spilled freely. "Sir, you've known me for 2 years. I raised your daughter like she was my own. Please believe me." But he turned away coldly. "I made a mistake trusting you." That was the moment Grace realized. He had already made up his mind. The officers gently grabbed her wrists. "Ma'am, we're placing you under arrest for suspected child assault." Her body went weak. Her hands were pulled behind her back. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin. "No, please, don't do this," she whispered. As they led her toward the door, she turned one last time toward Lily. "Sweetheart," she cried, "I love you. Please tell them I didn't hurt you." Lily's little lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away. Outside, reporters had already gathered. The sound of camera shutters filled the air like thunder. "Billionaire's maid accused of child abuse." One shouted. "Grace, did you hit the girl?" Another yelled. Grace lowered her head as the flashes blinded her. Every click of the camera felt like a punch to the heart. She heard the whispers, cruel, sharp, cutting through the air. "Look at her. How could she? She doesn't look sorry at all." People like her don't belong in homes like that. But no one saw the truth, the pain in her eyes, the fear in her heart, the love she still had for the little girl watching from the window. Back inside the house, Richard closed the curtains, shielding Lily from the chaos. But Lily ran to the window anyway, pressing her tiny hand against the glass. Through the blur of flashing lights and tears, she saw Grace being pushed into the back of a police car. Their eyes met for a brief second. A silent plea passed between them. Lily whispered, "I'm sorry, Auntie Grace," but her voice was lost in the noise. As the car drove away, Grace looked back at the mansion, the place that had once been her home. Her thoughts raced. How did it come to this? One misunderstanding, one moment, and her entire life had crumbled. At the police station, she was fingerprinted, photographed, and locked in a small grey cell. She sat on the hard bench, her mind replaying Lily's tearful face over and over. She prayed softly, "God, you know the truth. Please help that child find her voice." Meanwhile, on every TV and social media feed, the headlines spread like wildfire. "Billionaire's maid arrested for assaulting employer's daughter." People shared it. They judged. They hated, but no one asked for Grace's side of the story. And that night, as the world condemned her without listening, a little girl cried herself to sleep, holding a teddy bear and whispering the name of the woman who had always protected her, a woman who now sat behind bars, accused of a crime she never committed. The first night in jail was the longest night of Grace Johnson's life. She sat alone on the cold metal bench, her hands clasped tightly together. The room was dim, the air heavy with silence, broken only by the distant hum of flickering fluorescent lights. Her eyes were red from crying, but there were no tears left. She had given them all to fear and confusion. How could her world fall apart in just one morning? One scream, one misunderstanding, and now she was a criminal in everyone's eyes. She whispered softly to herself, "God, I didn't hurt that child. Please, you know I didn't." But there was no answer, only the echo of her own voice in the small, grey cell. The next day she met her court-appointed lawyer, a young man named Daniel Hayes. He looked barely 30, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Ms. Johnson," he said gently, sitting across from her, "I read your file. I know you're saying you didn't do it. I believe you." Those words, "I believe you," hit Grace harder than she expected. For the first time since her arrest, someone had spoken to her like she was human. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No one's listened to me since it happened." "Mr. Coleman, he wouldn't even let me explain." Daniel nodded. "It's not going to be easy," he admitted. "The media's already running with the story. He's a powerful man. We'll have to fight hard." Grace looked down at her hands, still marked from the handcuffs. "I've fought all my life," she said quietly. "I can do it again." Meanwhile, outside the walls of that jail cell, the world was merciless. The story had spread like wildfire. Every news channel, every online article, every gossip blog, all carried the same headline: "Billionaire's maid arrested for child abuse." They painted Grace as a monster, an angry woman who lost her temper and hit a billionaire's little girl. TV hosts discussed it as if they knew the truth. "She seemed so kind." "But you never really know people, do you?" She probably snapped under pressure. "Just look at her face in the photo, cold, guilty." But the photo they used wasn't fair, it was her mugshot. Eyes swollen from crying, lips trembling. That image became her label. At the grocery store where she used to shop, people whispered when her name was mentioned. Parents who once trusted her to watch their kids now looked away. Even her neighbors, people who knew her kindness, started avoiding her. Her landlord left her a message saying, "We can't have that kind of attention here." Grace had lost everything, her job, her home and her good name, all because of one lie. In another corner of the city, little Lily Coleman sat quietly in her huge pink bedroom. Toys surrounded her, but none of them brought her joy. She hadn't smiled in days. She missed Grace's warm hugs, her bedtime stories, the way she sang softly when Lily couldn't sleep. But her father, Richard, had forbidden any talk of Grace. "That woman hurt you," he said firmly whenever Lily tried to bring her up. "Oh, you must forget her." Lily nodded. But every night, when her father left the room, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Auntie Grace, I didn't tell them the truth." Her small heart carried a secret that grew heavier each day. Back in jail, Daniel continued to visit Grace. He worked tirelessly to find evidence, but there wasn't much to work with. No cameras, no witnesses, just the word of a billionaire against a maid's. Still, Grace never lost her faith. "Truth doesn't hide forever," she said one day, looking out through the small barred window. "One day it will come out." Daniel smiled faintly. "You're stronger than most people I've met." She shook her head. "I just don't have a choice. I've been through worse. Hunger, racism, heartbreak. But this..." She paused, her voice breaking. "This is the worst kind of pain. Being called something you're not." And then came the letters. A few people from her neighborhood who knew her well, mothers she had helped, children she had babysat, and began writing her in jail. One letter read, "Grace, I don't believe what they say. You took care of my little one like an angel. Hold on. The truth will come out." Those words gave her strength. Every night before sleeping she whispered a prayer for Lily, not for herself. "Lord, protect that child. Give her courage. Let her speak the truth, even if I never go free." But the world had already made up its mind. To most people, Grace Johnson was guilty. What no one realized was that the real story, the truth, lived in the heart of a 7-year-old girl who was too scared to speak. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just clear Grace's name. It would destroy everything Richard Coleman had built. 3 months had passed since Grace Johnson's arrest. 3 long months of sleepless nights, public shame, and endless waiting. But now, finally, the day had come. The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters whispered into their microphones, eager to capture every detail of the scandal that had rocked the city. Billionaire Richard Coleman versus former maid Grace Johnson, one reporter said dramatically. Today justice will be served. Grace sat quietly at the defense table, her hands folded tightly together. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She had never been inside a courtroom before. The walls felt cold, the air tense. Her lawyer, Daniel Hayes, leaned toward her. Grace, remember, stay calm. Tell the truth. That's all that matters. Grace nodded weakly. But deep inside she feared that in this world, truth didn't always win. Money did. Across the room sat Richard Coleman, dressed in a dark navy suit, his face emotionless. To the cameras he looked like a man seeking justice for his daughter, but his cold eyes avoided Grace's gaze, as if even looking at her would stain his pride. Beside him sat Lily, his little girl, looking much smaller than before. Her hair was neatly braided, her dress perfect, but her eyes were hollow. She clutched her teddy bear like it was her only friend. When Grace saw her, tears welled up in her eyes. For a moment, the noise, the whispers, everything faded away. All she saw was the child she had once rocked to sleep, the girl who used to call her Auntie Grace. The judge entered and everyone stood. His deep voice filled the room. Court is now in session. Once everyone sat, the prosecutor began his opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen, he said confidently, this is a case about trust, trust that was broken by the very person meant to protect a child. The defendant, Grace Johnson, used her position to harm a 7-year-old girl. The evidence will show that this so-called caregiver betrayed the Coleman family in the worst possible way. Every word felt like a knife cutting through Grace's heart. She wanted to scream, "That's a lie!" But Daniel gently squeezed her hand under the table, reminding her to stay strong. When it was his turn, Daniel stood and spoke softly yet firmly. My client is not a monster. She's a hard-working woman who has spent her life caring for others. There is no proof, no witness, no motive, only an accusation. We will show that this case is built on assumptions, not facts. The judge nodded. Proceed. One by one, witnesses were called. The butler said he heard Lily scream that day. The family doctor testified that he had seen a red mark on the girl's cheek, but none of them had seen Grace harm Lily. Then, finally, the judge said, Call the child to the stand, Lily Coleman. The room fell silent. Lily looked terrified as she walked up to the witness chair. Her tiny legs trembled as she sat down. She looked at the floor, gripping her teddy bear tightly. The judge's voice softened. Lily, do you understand what it means to tell the truth? Lily nodded quietly. The prosecutor smiled gently. Lily, sweetheart, can you tell us what happened that morning? The room leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Everyone waited. Lily hesitated. Her eyes darted toward her father. Richard gave her a small nod, his jaw tight. I screamed because... She began, her voice trembling. Richard's stare hardened. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Lily took a deep breath, tears forming in her eyes. Because Auntie Grace, Grace's heart stopped. Lily's voice cracked. She didn't do anything bad. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Richard's eyes widened. Lily, he hissed, but the judge quickly raised a hand. Mr. Coleman, you will remain silent. Lily began to cry. I fell off the bed. I hit my face on the table. Auntie Grace helped me, she didn't hurt me. Daddy told me to say she did. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions. The judge banged his gavel. Order, order in the court. Grace sat frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she just heard. The truth she had prayed for every night, had finally come out. From the mouth of the little girl she loved. Richard sat stunned, color draining from his face. She's lying, he shouted desperately. She's confused. But Lily looked straight at him, tears falling freely. No, Daddy, you're the one who lied. The judge's expression turned cold. Mr. Coleman, I suggest you remain silent before you make things worse for yourself. Grace buried her face in her hands and wept. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder, whispering, It's over. The truth is out. And for the first time in months, Grace felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. The courtroom was silent, painfully silent. Every camera, every eye, every breath was fixed on the small girl sitting in the witness chair. Lily Coleman's voice had cracked the walls of lies that surrounded her home, and the truth trembled in the air like thunder before a storm. "I fell off the bed," Lily repeated softly, tears streaking her tiny face. "I hit my cheek on the table. Auntie Grace didn't hurt me. Daddy told me to say she did." The words hung there, echoing. You could hear people gasp. Someone in the audience whispered, "Oh my God." Richard Coleman, the billionaire, the man used to control and silence, suddenly looked powerless. His jaw tightened, his face drained of color, his hands clenched into fists. "Lily," he said sharply, his voice trembling, "you don't know what you're saying." But the judge raised a stern hand. "Mr. Coleman, enough." Lily sniffled and wiped her tears. "I remember Daddy yelling at Auntie Grace that day," she continued. "He said she shouldn't tell him how to raise me. She only wanted to help me, but Daddy got mad. When he saw my face, he said, 'Say Grace hit you.'" A murmur rippled across the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. The once perfect image of a powerful man began to crack like glass under pressure. Grace sat frozen, her hands covering her mouth. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. Every word from Lily's lips was a miracle, the truth she had prayed for night after night in that cold, dark cell. Daniel, her lawyer, whispered beside her, "Let her speak. This is her moment." Lily's small voice trembled as she looked at the judge. "I was scared. Daddy said if I didn't say it, he'd be very angry with me. I didn't want him to be mad." The judge leaned forward, his tone gentle. "You're very brave, Lily. Telling the truth is never easy, but you've done the right thing." Lily nodded through her tears. Richard suddenly stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "She's just a child. She's confused. You can't take her words seriously." The judge's gavel came down hard. "Sit down, Mr. Coleman. Another outburst and I'll hold you in contempt of court." Richard's eyes darted between the judge and his daughter. His entire body trembled with a mix of fury and panic. Lily's voice cut through the tension again, soft but unshakable. "You told me to lie, Daddy. You said Auntie Grace was a bad person, but she's not. She's the kindest person I know." Richard sank slowly into his seat, his face in his hands. The man who once ruled boardrooms and headlines could now barely lift his head. His empire, his pride, his image, all of it began to crumble before the eyes of the world. Grace finally stood. The courtroom watched as she walked toward the witness stand. Her steps were slow, trembling. When she reached Lily, she knelt down, her voice soft and filled with love. "Sweetheart, look at me." Lily looked up through tears. "You did the right thing," Grace whispered. "You told the truth. That's what matters." Lily threw her tiny arms around her. "I'm sorry, Auntie Grace. I wanted to tell everyone before, but I was scared." Grace hugged her tightly, crying openly now. "It's okay, baby. You were so brave. I forgive you. I love you." The entire courtroom watched in silence, a billionaire's lie falling apart and a maid's truth shining brighter than gold. Even the judge's stern eyes softened for a moment. "This court owes you an apology, Ms. Johnson," he said. "The truth has finally been revealed." He turned to the prosecutor. "All charges are hereby dropped against Grace Johnson. And Mr. Coleman." His tone hardened. "You will be facing your own investigation for false accusation and obstruction of justice." The words hit Richard like a hammer. His shoulders slumped, his pride shattered. For the first time, he had no words. Reporters flooded the hallway as the judge adjourned. Cameras clicked endlessly, but this time they captured something different. Grace walking free, holding Lily's hand. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. "Grace, how do you feel after being proven innocent? What do you want to say to Mr. Coleman?" Grace stopped for a moment, her eyes glistening in the sunlight. She took a deep breath and said softly, "I don't hate him. I just pray he learns that money can't buy the truth." Her voice shook slightly as she looked down at Lily, who smiled up at her through her tears. And with that, they walked away together, one woman finally free, and one little girl finally brave enough to speak the truth. That day, the world witnessed something powerful. Not just the fall of a billionaire's pride, but the rise of an innocent heart. The truth once buried under lies and fear, had finally come to light, and it had set them both free. The next morning, headlines across the nation screamed the same shocking words: Billionaire's lies exposed, housemaid innocent. Little girl's testimony shatters powerful father's case. The story spread like wildfire. Talk shows, news anchors, and social media platforms erupted with outrage. People who once admired Richard Coleman for his wealth and success now saw him for what he truly was: a man who tried to destroy an innocent woman to protect his pride. Everywhere he turned, there were cameras, flashing lights, and microphones. Reporters shouted questions he could no longer answer. "Mr. Coleman, do you have anything to say about your false accusations? Are you planning to apologize to Grace Johnson? Do you regret putting her behind bars?" But the once confident billionaire said nothing. His silence was louder than any denial. At his mansion, the gates that once symbolized power now felt like prison bars. The staff had left. The house was empty, echoing with the ghosts of his own decisions. He sat alone in his massive study, the same room where he'd first ordered Grace to be fired and arrested. Now the newspaper lay open in front of him, showing Grace walking free, holding Lily's hand. His daughter's smile, gentle and relieved, pierced through his heart like a knife. He leaned back, his head in his hands. The memories hit him like waves. Grace singing lullabies to Lily, comforting her when she was sick, reading her bedtime stories when he was too busy chasing deals and profits. She was family, he whispered to himself. And I destroyed her. A knock broke the silence. Lily peeked in, holding a small drawing. "Daddy?" Richard looked up, his face weary, eyes red from sleepless nights. She walked in carefully and placed the paper on his desk. It showed a little girl holding hands with two people, one tall man, one woman with curly hair. Beneath it, she had written in messy letters, "Me, Daddy, and Auntie Grace." He stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "You still call her Auntie Grace?" Lily nodded softly. "Because she is. She forgave me. She said she doesn't hate you, Daddy. She just wants you to be better." Richard's heart cracked open. The arrogance, the anger, the endless pursuit of being right, all of it suddenly felt meaningless. "I hurt her," he said, tears forming in his eyes. "And I hurt you too." Lily climbed onto his lap, wrapping her arms around him. "Then say sorry, Daddy. Auntie Grace says it's never too late to do the right thing." Those words echoed in his mind long after she left the room. The next day, the world watched as Richard Coleman walked into a small community center, the same one where Grace now volunteered to help women who had faced injustice. Reporters followed him, curious and skeptical. Inside, Grace was reading to a group of children when she noticed him standing at the door. The room fell quiet. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two people bound by pain, betrayal, and truth. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice breaking. "Grace, I came to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, for the fear, for ruining your life." Grace looked at him, eyes glistening. The room could feel the heaviness in her silence. Then, she took a slow breath and said softly, "You didn't ruin my life. Mr. Coleman, you taught me what forgiveness really means." Her calmness hit him harder than any insult ever could. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice trembling. "I just wanted to say it." Grace stepped closer. "I forgave you the day Lily told the truth. Hate only keeps you chained, and I've had enough of chains." Richard lowered his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Thank you. I don't deserve it." Grace smiled faintly. "No one really deserves forgiveness. We just choose to give it, so we can finally be free." The children in the room watched quietly, sensing something sacred in the moment. Richard turned to leave, but before he did, Lily ran up from behind Grace and hugged him tightly. "Daddy, did you say sorry?" He smiled through tears. "Yes, sweetheart, I did." Grace placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "That's all that matters." For the first time in years, Richard Coleman walked out of a room without feeling powerful, but he did feel human. And for him, that was a start. Outside, the media was waiting, expecting arrogance or excuses. But he only said one thing before getting into his car. "I lied. I was wrong. And the truth, her truth, saved me." That clip would go viral worldwide. But not because it was scandalous. It was because, for once, a powerful man finally chose humility over pride. As Grace watched the sunset that evening, she whispered quietly, "Sometimes, the truth breaks us only to rebuild us stronger." And somewhere in that golden light, forgiveness found a home. Months passed since that unforgettable day in court. The day truth shattered lies, and forgiveness became stronger than revenge. Life began to find its rhythm again. Grace Johnson, once branded a criminal, was now a symbol of courage and compassion. Her story spread far beyond her small city. People everywhere were moved by her kindness, her strength, and her choice to forgive the man who nearly destroyed her life. Yet, despite all the praise, Grace didn't let fame change her. She went back to doing what she had always loved, caring for people. She started working at a small community center, teaching young women how to stand strong in the face of injustice. Every morning, she'd look at herself in the mirror, smile, and whisper, "You survived, Grace. Now live." But there was one person who came to see her every week without fail, little Lily. Lily would run into the center every Saturday, her laughter echoing through the halls. She'd hug Grace tightly and say, "Auntie Grace, I helped Daddy make breakfast today," or "We planted flowers in the garden." Each time, Grace's heart would fill with quiet joy. The girl who once hid behind fear was now blooming with light. Grace and Lily would spend hours together, baking cookies, reading stories, or painting colorful pictures. One afternoon, as they sat under the shade of a big oak tree, Lily asked softly, "Auntie Grace, do you really forgive Daddy?" Grace looked at her for a moment, then smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart, because holding anger is like carrying a heavy stone. If I let it go, I can finally walk free." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "I think Daddy is trying to change. He doesn't yell anymore. He even said sorry to the housekeeper." Grace's smile widened. "That's good, Lily. Everyone deserves a second chance, even grown-ups." Meanwhile, Richard Coleman was walking a very different path. The once powerful billionaire had lost much. Investors withdrew, board members resigned, and his reputation crumbled like dust in the wind. But strangely, he didn't chase it back this time. He sold his luxury cars, his private jets, even the massive mansion that once stood as his symbol of pride. He moved into a modest house on the edge of town, where he lived quietly with Lily. He began volunteering at shelters, using his wealth not to impress, but to rebuild lives, especially for those who had suffered from injustice. People whispered, some mocked, but he didn't care anymore. He wasn't doing it for image. He was doing it to feel human again. One afternoon, as he served food at a local shelter, an old woman asked, "Aren't you that rich man from the news?" Richard smiled humbly. "Yes, ma'am. I used to be that man. Now I'm just trying to be a better one." The woman smiled kindly. "Then maybe you're richer now than you ever were." That night, Richard sat with Lily, helping her with homework. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "can we invite Auntie Grace to dinner one day?" He hesitated. Guilt still lingered in his heart, but then he nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I'd like that very much." And so one quiet evening, Grace found herself standing at the front door of Richard's small house. She took a deep breath and knocked. When he opened the door, he looked different, softer, humbler, almost peaceful. "Grace," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." Lily rushed over, beaming. "Auntie Grace, Daddy made dinner himself." Grace laughed. "Really? That's impressive." They sat together at the table, awkward at first, but soon laughter began to replace the silence. Lily chatted endlessly about school. Grace shared stories from the community center, and Richard just listened, a faint smile on his face. After dinner, as Lily went to her room to draw, Grace stood by the window looking out at the stars. "You've changed, Richard," she said softly. He nodded slowly. "I had to. I couldn't let my daughter grow up thinking power means hurting others." Grace turned to him, her eyes warm. "You're learning what real strength is. Kindness." He looked down, his voice thick. "Grace, I'll never stop being sorry." She smiled gently. "You don't have to say it again. Just keep living better. That's how you honor forgiveness." For a moment, they stood in silence, two broken souls who had finally found peace, not through revenge, but through understanding. As Grace left that night, Lily ran after her and hugged her one last time. Auntie Grace, promise you'll never stop visiting." Grace knelt down, smiling through tears. "I promise, my brave girl." When she walked away under the moonlight, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. In her heart, she whispered, "We are all capable of change, and even those who once hurt us." And in that quiet truth, both Grace and Richard began a new chapter, not defined by the past, but by the courage to heal. 2 years passed. The city that once whispered about Grace Johnson's humiliation now spoke her name with respect, admiration, and gratitude. The story of the billionaire and the maid had become something more. It had become a lesson about truth, forgiveness, and the strength of a woman's heart. Grace's life had transformed, not in luxury, but in peace. She had opened a small foundation called Lily's Hope, dedicated to helping women and children who had been wrongfully accused or silenced by power. The name came, of course, from the little girl who had once found the courage to tell the truth. Every day, Grace worked side by side with people who had lost faith in humanity, and through her, they found it again. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a guide, a light, a voice for those who couldn't speak. But even as her new life flourished, she never forgot the two people who had changed her destiny: Richard and Lily. Lily had grown taller, brighter, her laughter filling every space she walked into. She often visited the foundation with her father, bringing books or flowers. And every time she saw Grace, she'd run into her arms just like she used to, saying, "Auntie Grace, I missed you." Grace would smile, her heart softening, "And I missed you too, my sunshine." As for Richard Coleman, the world's view of him had changed too. After years of silence, he stepped back into the public eye, not as a businessman, but as a man seeking redemption. He began speaking at charity events, sharing his story openly, about arrogance, about pride, and about how money can never replace honesty or kindness. People were skeptical at first, but as they saw the changes in him, they began to listen. His words carried weight because they came from pain. One evening, he stood on a stage at a charity gala hosted by Grace's foundation. Cameras flashed. The room fell silent as he approached the microphone. 2 years ago, he began, voice low but steady, "I was a man who thought wealth made me powerful. I used that power to hurt someone who did nothing wrong, a woman who showed more strength in her pain than I ever did in my pride." He paused, his eyes glancing toward Grace, who sat in the front row. Calm and graceful, "She forgave me," he continued, "and that forgiveness became the mirror that showed me the man I needed to become." There wasn't a single dry eye in the room. When he finished, the audience stood and applauded, not for his fame, but for his humanity. Grace clapped too, smiling softly, proud not of his words, but of his transformation. After the event, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city lights. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was filled with peace, the kind that only comes after storms have passed. "You've done good things, Richard," Grace said quietly. He smiled faintly. "Because you taught me how." She looked out at the skyline. "No, you taught yourself. You just needed the truth to break your walls." He nodded slowly. "And you turned pain into purpose. That's real power, Grace." They both laughed softly, not out of humor, but from the relief of finally standing in the light after so many years of shadow. A soft voice interrupted them. Lily, running toward them with 2 candles in her hands. "Auntie Grace, Daddy, I made these for you. One for forgiveness and one for love." Grace took one candle, Richard the other. They looked at each other, and then at Lily, the little girl who had been the bridge between their worlds. As the 3 of them lit the candles together, Grace whispered, "May the truth always shine brighter than lies." Lily smiled. "And may forgiveness always win." They stood there quietly, their candles glowing against the evening sky, symbols of a past forgiven and a future reborn. From that day forward, Richard continued to support Grace's foundation, funding shelters and education programs for underprivileged women. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he understood now that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a lifelong journey. Grace's foundation grew nationwide, helping thousands. Yet every time she gave a speech, she always ended with the same simple line: "No matter how dark the night, the truth will always find a way to dawn." And somewhere in the crowd, Richard and Lily would always be there, smiling, proud and grateful. One sunset evening, as Grace stood outside the center, she looked at the horizon, the sky painted gold and red, and she whispered to herself, "I was once broken, but now I am whole." The wind carried her words gently away, as if the universe itself agreed. And for the first time, she truly felt free, not because the world believed her, but because she had forgiven, healed and chosen love over pain. The story that began with accusation ended with redemption. The maid who was once silenced had become a voice for many, and the billionaire who once stood above everyone now walked beside them. Because in the end, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the power that rebuilds the world.